it really didn't, but that's okay. All right, Karen, next question. Let's talk about some other ways that people can lose weight. You want to talk about things that can help you lose weight. So if it's not lemon coffee, what are some of the best foods that can really help somebody jumpstart their weight loss?
Well, I have to give a huge shout out to beans and lentils. Legumes are just a food category that are so highly overlooked in the United States, and studies show that they're really helpful for weight loss, and just adding in, and that's always a wonderful way to go about making dietary changes, right, to focus on adding in healthy foods. And because beans and lentils, split peas, they're just so high in fiber, they have a high protein content, they're satiating and come packed full of vitamins and minerals. So that would be my, number one suggestion would be to focus on adding in some legumes.
I'm a big fan of legumes too, for so many reasons. And there's so many different ones, and they're versatile. You can really add them to just about everything, right down to and including a salad. You just throw them right on there. Boom, you got your greens and your beans, and that's a pretty good combination.
Yeah.
I got to tell you.
Right, Chuck?
Oh yeah, it's so good, and you can even like hide them in smoothies and things. Or I was chatting with one exam roomie this past week about black bean brownies and how they tried it, and they were like, "Oh my goodness gracious, it was so good! I even took them into work, and my colleagues ate them, and they were none the wiser, and they thought that it was just the most decadent, dense brownie that they had ever had in their entire life. Who knew there were black beans in it? Nobody but the listener, my friend." A lot of people in the chat right now, Karen, are saying, nope, this lemon coffee thing just does not sound like it's a winner. But somebody here, I believe it was Jeff, who said, let's just be weird and try it for 10 days and see what happens. I don't know. Have you heard this one particular myth from SR at 1206 saying that bananas can make a person fat?
I have heard from so many patients that I work with that they are fearful to eat bananas, right? Because there's this myth that they are going to cause weight gain, and or elevated blood sugar. And, I hope I can put those fears to rest, that there's absolutely no evidence supporting that. And bananas, as are, almost all fruits, with the exception of like avocado and coconut, are so low in calorie density that, feel free to consume them, without any restriction, and, feel good about choosing foods that are packed full of nutrients and fiber. But yeah, that's definitely one of the craziest myths I've heard too.
Yeah, it is interesting to me. So if you look at the nutrition content for banana, it's going to say 0 grams of fat on it. And so whether it's a banana or anything else, if there is in fact no fat in said product, can it indeed help you pack on the pounds?
Yeah, that's a great point, Chuck, right? Like if you look at the healthiest foods on the planet, and at least like the foods that are lowest in calorie density, they are such because they have very little fat.
You're saying. But caveat to that though, what about artificial sweeteners, 0-calorie sweeteners like NutraSweet or something like that? A lot of people turn to those when they're trying to lose weight. Will they actually help them?
It depends, right? Like, how are they coming packaged? Are they in the form of, are they being added to diet sodas? And, which studies show, right, like, people might have that, false security of choosing a diet soda and thinking they're saving calories, and also choose, a hamburger and french fries to go along with it. And so really it's your overall dietary pattern that's going to have the biggest impact. In addition, the artificial sweeteners taste really sweet, and, just thinking about how you respond to that sweet taste and whether or not it's a trigger for you for additional cravings for more things that are sweet, and how that might impact your ability to lose weight if you're reaching for foods that are more calorie dense, as opposed to fruits that are just naturally sweet in their, whole form and how they're found in nature.
Well, let's stay on, how you can kind of get hooked on sweet stuff like you were just alluding to there. There may or may not be somebody in my life who has the sweetest tooth I have ever known in my entire life, where they even, will add extra stevia drops to their lemonade, which comes pre-sweetened as well. So if somebody has that kind of hyper palatable, ultra sweet tooth, what would your recommendation be to kind of help kick that habit?
Yeah, it's going to take some time and patience probably to change your taste buds. Uh, they do in fact change, and we, develop new taste buds about every 3 weeks. And so perhaps, gradually reducing the amount of sweetener that you're using, or taking the approach of like, hey, I'm setting this aside for 3 weeks to see what happens. I think it depends on the individual to know like what's going to work best for them. But absolutely, like we are, as humans, like the sweetness of fruits, apples and berries and bananas, right? Like that is the level of sweetness that we're designed to, be used to, and like those are appropriate levels of sweetness, and the more of these, like you said, hyperpalatable, the things that are the foods that are packaged with sugars or artificial sweeteners just really overstimulate, our taste buds. They cause a release of dopamine in our brains that, makes us feel good, makes us want more of those foods in a way that, fruit does not do that. And so we have to get back to a level where the fruit, has that response where like that does taste good, that satisfies that craving for sweetness.
A couple of quick hellos to the exam roomies who are tuning in today. Foley here is checking in from Roma, Italy. That's awesome. Thanks so much for making the time to join us. And Joey Dangerously says that this is his first live show. So thank you for checking us out live here. Every Wednesday, 9 Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific is where you can find us right here on YouTube and on Facebook. Next question comes to us from Liana's Creations at 1207. Boy, if you haven't heard this one before, why is it so commonly accepted that, quote, you can't lose weight while eating carbs?
Oh, Liana, that is just, the question I might be asked most often. And of course that, is a total myth that, foods, that there's definitely a difference in the way in which carbohydrates are packaged, right? And so when we are choosing carbohydrates that come in foods close to how they're found in nature, then we are getting so many benefits from choosing those foods. So things like fruits and vegetables, whole grains, especially whole intact grains and legumes, they're all, low in fat. They are foods that are low in calorie density, which means that we can consume, large quantities of them for less calories than animal-based foods and processed foods. And that's a huge difference than carbohydrates that come packaged in refined or processed foods, right? So if we take like white bread, for example, the grain that was used to make it might have started as a whole grain, but it's been stripped of all of, the parts of the grain that contain the most fibers, the most nutrients, and we're essentially left with, calories and starch. And, that's not going to fuel our body in the same way. And it's also about 3 times more calorie dense than, the whole grain from which the flour was originally made. So, less calorie density in high carbohydrate whole plant foods as opposed to those refined or processed foods that are high in carbs. You know what else is interesting, Chuck? Like, often the carbohydrates are demonized, and when I ask people, like, well, what are you talking about when you say, I'm avoiding carbs, they might say things like, oh, I'm not eating pizza or cookies or cakes or crackers. And what's interesting is that, what else do those foods contain? Sure, they have some carbohydrates. What else do they come packaged with? High amounts of fat, right? And so, for some reason, that's often overlooked in this whole discussion of, weight loss and carbohydrates.
Let's go ahead here and take a question from Denise. Are almonds healthier than peanuts? Let's talk nuts and weight loss.
Let's do it.
So which is it? Is almond the healthier choice, or is it the peanut?
Yeah, so define healthier, right? Like, how would we put it? If you take an ounce, right, let's say you have an ounce of peanuts and an ounce of almonds, they're going to be pretty similar in calories and fat content, protein, and fiber content. And so the almonds might contain some more phosphorus, some more calcium, some more magnesium. Like, there are going to be differences in the amounts of vitamins and minerals, more vitamin E in almonds than in peanuts. The peanuts, on the other hand, have more folate. And so, it's kind of like, well, how do you define healthier? And, I'm thinking along the lines of one of your popular guests on the show, Dr. Will B., right? And wanting to foster like a really healthy gut microbiome, which is certainly important for weight loss and just overall health, is, well, let's have both, right? Because the more diverse our diet is in whole plant foods, the more diverse our microbiome. And so maybe we can have the almonds and the peanuts.
Okay, I like where your head's at with that. Question from Danny: is there such a thing as a healthy fat?
Yeah, so there are healthy foods, right? And whole foods, whole plant foods in particular, right? They come packaged with protein, with carbohydrates, and with fat. So every whole plant food, even that banana that you mentioned earlier, has zero fat. It doesn't have zero fat. It has a little bit of fat. And so those whole plant foods are healthy foods that provide our bodies with fat in quantities that are just like amazing for the amount of fat that we need to be healthy and to prevent and reduce the risk of the most common chronic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and cancer.
So some more specific examples. I mean, are you saying though that eating the avocado which has a high amount of fat for a plant food, is the healthier option compared to going through the drive-thru, picking up burgers and fries?
Totally different.
Totally.
Right. The benefit of choosing the whole plant foods is that by and large they're low in saturated fat, right, as opposed to that hamburger and French fries. And that saturated fat, that's the type of fat associated with increased, risk of a variety of chronic diseases and inflammation. And those whole plant foods, right? So whether it's like black beans or your oatmeal in the morning, right? Like, there is some fat in there, and those foods are coming packed full of the fiber, lots of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. And then there are some whole plant foods like nuts and seeds and avocado, olives, coconut. Those are higher fat plant foods. And so thinking about them, often my suggestion to people is, and depending on, their health goals, their weight goals, right, like, they might be appropriately consumed as condiments, and adding a small amount of them to meals can, give your body a good amount of fat in a very healthy way.
What is the target amount of fat that people should be eating every day? What's the limit there?
What's the limit? Oh my goodness. So that's going to depend, Chuck, on a few things. And certainly, like a good way to look at it, something that I like to think about, is the percentage of calories coming from fat as opposed to like a particular amount of grams, right? So having 10 to 15% of your total calories coming from fat is a great way to minimize, chronic disease risk, and especially if you're someone who's living with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes and wanting to improve insulin sensitivity, reverse that insulin resistance. If you're someone who has high cholesterol or heart disease, and you want to improve your heart health, if you want to lose weight, then really, looking at 10 to 15% of your total calories coming from fat can be helpful. And the reason I like to think about it that way is that almost all of your whole plant foods fall either below or within that range, like 10 to 15% of their total calories are from fat, or, fruits, for example, are often, way less than that. So when you're just, going through your day, eating a variety of whole plant foods, it's not like you have to constantly be doing this addition and, math all day long to get to a certain amount of fat. It's just like these foods come packaged within the amount of fat that's appropriate, and that falls within that 10 to 15% total at the end of the day.
All right, let's switch gears here and take a question from Pam at 1214. Pam is wondering whether dates and raisins inhibit weight loss.
That depends. That's going to be my answer to so many things. Like, what else are you eating, Pam? Right? Like, it really is about the overall picture of your diet, and what's the difference between dates and raisins as opposed to, grapes and apples? They are dried, right? So they do have a higher calorie density. And so all that means is that you can, right, like for the same amount of weight of grapes, right? Like if you takes up 2 cups of grapes to equal about a quarter cup of raisins, right? Same amount of calories, but way more volume in the whole grapes versus the dried raisin. And so in just thinking through that calorie density equation and, the amount of dried fruits that you might be consuming and what your overall dietary pattern looks like, they can certainly be included and people can still lose weight enjoying them. And if you are, at a point where you're not sure what's prohibiting your weight loss, then it might be something to take a look at and see, like, is it worth swapping out some of the dried fruits for whole fresh fruits that are a lot lower in calorie density.
Carolyn, just checking in the chat room, says, carbs on my jam. Right on. All right, let's do a tale of two ends here. Let's start with Linda's question. She wants to know, why am I less likely to be hungry when eating a plant-based diet?
Yeah, I love that. That's such a wonderful benefit, right, of eating plant foods. And I'd say there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that, especially if you're choosing those whole plant foods that I keep emphasizing, the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, the legumes, they are providing a lot of fiber, and fiber is satiating. The beans and lentils are also high in protein, which is also satiating, as are a lot of your whole intact grains. So those foods help, to fill us up, and the awesome thing about them is that, they are so much lower in calorie density, I keep referring to that too, than animal foods and processed foods, right? So we can eat a larger volume of them for less calories. In addition, that fiber feeds the good, the probiotic bacteria in our large intestine, all right? And as a result of them, eating that fiber, they produce short-chain fatty acids, which are just like amazing and do so many good things for us. But one is that they down-regulate hunger hormones, and so that might be another way in which eating these whole plant foods helps us feel full and stay satiated for longer.
All right, but now, so we said it's a kind of a tale of two ends here. So on the opposite end of that
Spectrum, we have a question from Paige, and I thought that this was really interesting. And
just a caveat here, obviously we can't give patient-specific information, so we're going to be talking in generalities here. But maybe Paige isn't the only one
who has this issue. Paige wrote, dabbled in a whole food vegan diet
for the last 4 years. Said she loves the food, but the problem is it does not keep her full. She says that, for example, at breakfast she'll have a big old bowl of oats with some fruit in there, maybe throw in some flaxseed and a handful of greens and walnuts. She said by the time that she finishes with breakfast, she is absolutely stuffed, but just an hour later, she feels like she hasn't eaten anything, and that makes it hard for her to stick with the vegan diet. She feels like she wants to go back to animal proteins since they were better, they did a better job, she says, of keeping her full for an extended period of time. So this is an interesting one. Number one is, like, how can somebody go from being stuffed to being ravenously hungry if they're eating a really healthy meal that's full of fiber?
Yeah, so in addition to fiber being satiating, protein is too, right? And, it's not the first time that I've heard this or come across this in conversations with patients that, a breakfast of oatmeal and fruit as an example, which sure, it has a lot of fiber. Those foods tend to be lower in protein and also pretty low in calorie density, right? So maybe you feel full after consuming them, and then you're hungry again, right? Like as Paige said, maybe an hour later. So if we want to add in, like, just as an experiment to see, like, oh, well, what happens if we also increase the protein in that meal? Chuck, what comes to mind for you? Like, what plant foods come to mind that are fiber-rich and protein-rich?
Beans. We're going to go right back to the legumes there. Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%, right? So you get your beans, your lentils, your peas. They're high in fiber. They have a high protein content. And what's really cool is research suggests that they may be more satiating than animal protein, right? So if that is what Paige is going back to, my suggestion would be, like, let's swap the breakfast meal altogether. Try something like a tofu scramble with black beans and veggies, or maybe a lentil soup for breakfast, or maybe a bean chili with some veggies, or over a sweet potato, and see how that works for you.
That doesn't sound half bad at all. Like, even for breakfast,
that sounds pretty daggone amazing to me. I'd be all in for that. You don't always have to eat breakfast food for breakfast. I just want to throw that out there. As much as I do love oatmeal and a ton of fruit there, sometimes, mix it up a little bit. That is not a bad idea at all. Let's take a question from Cleona here, I believe at 1214, wondering how bad is corn syrup in your diet?
Yeah, well, what is corn syrup, right? It's a byproduct, right, of corn, and very sweet, and essentially doesn't have any of the vitamins and minerals or the fiber that you find in, the whole corn itself, which is a whole grain and a healthy food. And so again, it really depends on, how it's being utilized. Like, corn syrup often is found in, sodas and packaged and processed foods that overall are just not providing our bodies with any, type of real healthy nutrition, right? Like foods that are pretty low or void in vitamins and minerals and fiber. And, in addition, again, like going back to, people who have a sweet tooth, right? Corn syrup is very sweet tasting. And so if you find that you're someone who, just having that sweet taste, triggers that release of dopamine in the brain, which for some people is stronger than others, and can just, increase cravings and, make it more challenging to kind of break that cycle. And so certainly, again, like always taking a step back and looking at the overall dietary pattern that someone's consuming, and, having a good variety of the fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, which contain zero corn syrup, right? And perhaps just, keeping that to a minimum, if at all, right? It certainly is not necessary at all for good health, and so absolutely can be avoided.
Yeah, I would love to know, speaking of that dopamine release, like why is it stronger in some people compared to others? For me, when I was still struggling with my weight, like it wasn't just a release. We're talking about the dam bursting open, and it was a torrent of dopamine every time I would eat fast food or pizza or anything like that. I mean, like my brain went super happy, super fast, and it made it so much more difficult to lose weight. So let's let's do some rapid fire here. We only have a few minutes left, so let's see if we can knock out as many of these as we possibly can. Susan has a question going back to nuts. We were talking about those a little bit ago. She wants to know whether roasting nuts and seeds lowers the nutritional benefit of them.
Roasting them. Not that I know of. However, right, like what often comes along with roasting, I would say, adding, salt perhaps, or sometimes, right, like looking at adding in oil, salt, sugars, is obviously going to impact, perhaps this oil or sugar, the calorie content, adding in salt, or any of those, often tends to increase the amount that we consume.
Atypical Paul, 1227, is it possible to get too little fat in your diet?
Yeah, I would say it's not impossible. It's not a common thing, Paul, right? Like, we're not a country of people suffering from fat deficiency. And so really just, again, like, and especially in looking at the foods that contribute the most saturated fat to one's diet, like minimizing the saturated fat, avoiding it as much as possible is certainly a very good approach for, not just weight loss, but minimizing disease risk as well.
Sylvia at 1226, what do you think about fasting for losing weight?
So, Sylvia, what kind of fasting are you talking about? Probably the most popular, or at least what I hear about most commonly from patients and clients, is what's called time-restricted eating, where people, set a point in the evening where they say, I'm not going to eat past this time, or they allow, at least a 12-hour window without eating any food. And yeah, sure, research shows that there are benefits, not just for weight loss, but also for lowering blood pressure, blood sugar, and cholesterol, and in allowing your body some time to rest, and having at least that 12-hour window without eating.
Well, this is one from Sarah, and I know there are a lot of people who are watching this and like, I want to know the answer to this one too. And the question is, how quickly can a person lose weight while eating a plant-based diet?
Yeah, so that definitely depends on the types of foods that you're eating for sure, and if you're opting for those whole, like the power plate foods that you see, the fruits, the vegetables, the legumes, the whole grains, you're really going to get the biggest bang for your buck, because those are the foods lowest in calorie density. I'm just thinking back to a study that the Physicians Committee did that showed, it resulted in women losing about 13 pounds on average in 12 weeks after adopting a low-fat vegan diet.
All right, here's a good follow-up from Jay. Why is it harder to keep the weight off when you lose it quickly? Seems like that happens a lot. Happened to me.
It did?
Oh, yeah. Oh, when I was yo-yo dieting back in the day, it was all about, boom, like, let's get it off as quickly as possible. And then, like, that one little slip, and it came back, and it came back in just overnight, it seemed.
Yeah, right? So, Chuck, what happened? Like, what were you doing to lose the weight in the first place?
I wasn't eating the stuff that
I have been eating. So it's a slippery slope. Like, I can give you my thing, but I want you to answer first as the dietitian. Let's get the professional's answer, and then I'll give you my experience.
Yeah, I mean, often it has to do with how the weight loss is achieved, right? So for example, if like someone's just like really restricting calories,